Good morning. My name is Kimberly McQuarrie, and I'm the Director of Community Programming and the Co-Director of the Innovation Labs here at the Dalí Museum. And I'd like to thank both our live and streaming audiences for joining us for this special edition of our Coffee with the Curator series. Today, we're joined by a very special guest speaker, Andy Huse of the University of South Florida Library System, for a talk, The Picasso That Wasn't, Bust of a Woman. Now, before we get to the talk, I'd like for you to please join me in thanking the city of St. Petersburg for their continued sponsorship of our educational programming, including this lecture series. Yes. And I hope you give yourselves also a warm round of applause, because we like to offer a special thanks also to our members, because it really is you who make all of our events possible. Now, I'd like to always invite you to visit our website so that you're up to date with amazing opportunities like the lecture that you're enjoying today. And here's just a few of the things that we have coming up in April. Tomorrow, we have our film club discussion, Lost in Translation. So if that's a film that you love or that you'd like to take a look at before tomorrow, be sure to register and you can hop on the Zoom conversation. Next week, we're inviting the St. Pete Opera back for Opera at the Dalí, and they're going to be sharing some songs that are evocative of the regions of northern Spain and southern France that are explored in the Picasso exhibit. So that's going to be really exciting. Then, of course, we have our Yoga at the Dalí, our monthly yoga series. We have a very special performance coming up. Our beloved Roxanne Fay is going to be performing in a two-person play about Picasso entitled A Picasso. That's going to be an amazing performance. Be sure to catch it if you can. And then our very own Peter Tush on April 19th is going to be holding a virtual discussion on Pablo Picasso, Melodies for the Master. And he's going to be exploring, Peter has a secret life, or maybe not so secret life, as Dalí, as a DJ. And so Peter's going to be sharing with us both music that inspired Picasso and music that was inspired by Picasso. So you're going to hear everything from 1920s jazz through Jay-Z. So it should be a pretty interesting discussion. And then finally, we're going to have a very, very special edition of Poetry at the Dalí this month. I hope that you know this is National Poetry Month. And so if you haven't read any poetry this month, I highly encourage you to do so. You can also join us in our garden on 4/20 for our collaboration with Eckerd College and their poetry series. It's going to be live. It's going to be a very enjoyable evening, and you can come out, have a nice glass of wine, and listen to some amazing poetry. So be sure to join us for these events. And as usual, if you follow us on social media and you come, take some pictures, #TheDalí. Now, it's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Andy Huse of the University of South Florida's Library System. Huse is an archivist in Special Collections at USF and the author of several books, including From Saloons to Steakhouses, A History of Tampa. With over 2 decades at the USF libraries, Huse is a specialist in local history, including the history of Tampa and the history of USF itself. Today, we're lucky to have him with us, in conjunction with our Picasso exhibit, to share a little bit of that local history, with a little-known story about a Tampa Picasso connection, specifically a Picasso sculpture planned for the USF campus but never completed. Please join me in welcoming Andy Huse.
Well, I want to thank Dr. McQuarrie for the invite. I want to thank you all for being here. It is a neat story. I need to start with a little prologue, I guess, just to get you up to speed or to take you back about 50 years that we need to go. So think about if you will, the Tampa Bay area in, say, 1972, 73. What does the arts community look like? And the answer is there was not a lot going on. The state of Florida was not known as a very arty place at the time. And so I think one of the things that's worth pointing out is that USF, University of South Florida, was, I guess, a big disruptor there in the sense that it brought a lot of art that never would have seen the light of day in the Bay Area and probably not the state of Florida. So to give you a little background, the USF was founded in 1960. It was actually started in 56, but didn't open for business until 1960. They count the date of conception from, as their birthday. But in 1960, it opened in what was a big sandy expanse in Tampa. And of course, Tampa and St. Petersburg had fought over where the campus was going to land eventually. There was a lot of interesting fights about that, and that's a whole nother talk. But St. Pete thought, since it would be started near a brewery, the students would always be drunk, or that the buildings would just sink into the sand of the campus. And that issue will come up again in our discussion of this Picasso. So I think that's the first thing to keep in mind, is there was not a lot of arts going on, and what was going on was a lot of, I would say, avant stuff and things that are a little beyond, the tastes of average people in Florida at the time. So there's a lot of people coming down from, directly from New York City, avant dance troupes, cinema, art shows, and of course you have like graphic studios and places like that where people are coming down to practice their art. So USF had become early on a hub of the arts, and so I think that's the first thing to keep in mind. And there was a changing of the guard around 1970, 71, where John Allen, the president, who kind of put USF together. And I think it's worth noting here, that he wanted to start a university. Basically, he knew that there was no money for athletics or anything like that, and he really wanted to double down on academic achievement. The accent on learning was for a long, long time USF's kind of motto, accent on learning. So the arts were a big part of that. And so, I think it's interesting because it was a brand new university. A lot of really high quality faculty and administrators came there because they saw it as an opportunity to start something new, to kind of escape the red tape of established universities and things like that. So because of that reason, there were a lot of bright lights early on in USF's history, even though the budget wasn't huge and things like that. So I think early on, USF was sort of punching above its weight, especially when you think about how established kind of places like UF and FSU were. USF was really still trying to find its footing. So when the second president came in, it's kind of coincides with much of this story. So anyway, I just wanted to give you a little background there. Of course, we are talking about a Picasso, and Picassos were always made or designed by Pablo Picasso. And he had a kind of a partner in crime in his later career. So he really focused a lot on kind of monumental sculptures in his later career. Like the Chicago one is well known, but then he was really interested in using concrete to make sculptures as well. So one of the techniques he used was specifically for this. So here's a picture of the two together. This is shortly before Picasso's death, but you can see he's holding a couple models there. One of them, the one on the left, is our sculpture, which was called Bust of a Woman. So that's the initial kind of small model that was made. And Nesjar was a specialist in the concrete aggregate construction, and we're going to talk about that in just a little bit. So he was the one who was chosen by Picasso to realize the vision. So if somebody were to pick up one of these sculptures and want to make it, Picasso would not be the one doing it. It would be Carl Nesjar who would go on behalf of Picasso, and then he would actually design it according to Picasso's design. So here is a picture of the same model that he was just holding, but this is a picture where Picasso had actually signed it. You can see his signature at the bottom right, and up on the left you can see University of South Florida Tampa campus, Carl Nestjar. So it says he gives permission for USF to build it. Carl Nestjar has to be the one to build it. And then you can see the model here. So, I'm not a big expert in art, and I don't know if I need to be for this talk, because we're really interested in the community and its sort of reaction to the art. And of course, as most artists will tell you, you can measure the value of art by how much discussion it starts, whether people like it or not, right? So this is you can see it's sort of a Picasso-ized bust of a woman. So that means, a woman from her shoulders up. And it's obviously been fractured and planed out into different abstract forms. So I guess the first thing to talk about, though, is that this was going to be built on a monumental scale. So like I said, that was his big specialty at the time. He's really interested in big sculptures. So this is going to be 110, 120 feet tall. It weighs something like, many tons, over a dozen tons. It would be a massive concrete pillar, basically. But, and I guess the first thing that I think of when I see this is like a massive white concrete sculpture would be glaring. But I think the thing to keep in mind is the concrete aggregate method of building this. So more or less, you would take wood and frame out what it is, the planes that you want to create, and then you would make a framework of rebar within that. So reinforced steel, and then you would fill that kind of vacuum up with all kinds of different rocks, and all the way up to the top. And then when you finished, you would pour concrete through the whole thing. And what you would end up with is something that you could take the wood off of. You would have everything would be framed out, and then you would sandblast it. And basically, by shearing away some of that concrete, you would expose this aggregate that's inside. So it wouldn't look like just a white uniform plane, but it would be all these different rocks that are sort of exposed inside this thing. So I think it could be interesting, and there's a lot of different ways it can look, and I apologize for some of these pictures. This, I believe, is in New York City. This is made around the same time that this stuff was talked about. This one, I believe, is in Germany. It's a terrible picture, but I do like it because you can see the speckling of the concrete aggregate, and this is actually part of a group sculpture. This is at Princeton. And this is much smaller than obviously the one that we're talking about, but you can really see the aggregate here that's exposed. So USF, how did USF get involved in this at all, right? So like I said, it's a small university. Nobody, a lot of people just didn't know it even existed. And I think it should be pointed out too that when USF was actually founded, a lot of people in the area were alarmed that they might be teaching obscene things. They heard that they taught the beat writers, and that people were reading Jack Kerouac, which has swear words in it. So there was a groundswell of activity against the university. And this wasn't just a couple loud people in the community, but the state legislature itself. So for those of you who, it kind of sounds familiar, doesn't it? But for those of you who aren't aware, the state legislature actually started an investigative unit called the Florida Legislative Investigation Committee. And basically they assigned their own police force, but they were very intensely interested in what was being taught at the universities. And the whole committee originally began to sort of suppress civil rights and the NAACP. And when they didn't find any communists in the organization, they sort of changed the state university system. And I think this is important to contextualize all this stuff. So USF is kind of a new, innovative, forward-looking thing. And this kind of clique of politicians in the state legislature known as the Pork Chop Gang were very interested in kind of stopping anything like this. All they could think of with the state university being started in an urban area was integration, that white and black students might get together, and they did, to advocate for racial integration. So politics and a lot of other things are all bound up in this, and I should also remind you the Cold War is going on at this time, so for a lot of people, that's all they can think of is like the specter of communism, et cetera. So, but USF ended up, the dean of the arts kind of knew someone who knew Carl Nestjar. So they reached out to him and he was like, yeah, great. Nestjar was hugely, appreciative to be working with Picasso and was very enthusiastic. Somebody wanted him to put up a sculpture. I think it wasn't just a payday for him, but something that was really meaningful. So he was very enthusiastic. So the designs were given to USF, and some people at USF actually made wooden models. So the model is like about this big, made out of wood and just painted white. So these were to give an idea of what this would look like, and these were shopped around by the administration to give people an idea of what they were trying to do. So they made the two models. So President Cecil Mackey is on the right, and like I said, he arrived in I think 1971, and really wanted to make his mark, I think, on USF. And to give you an idea, USF was still definitely, there was a lot of improvisation going on, like in the administration. Give you an example is like when Mackey came in, the foundation, their biggest role was to give students like scholarships and prizes, and they were much more effective at giving money away than raising money. So that will be important later. So anyway, so this thing lands at USF's lap. They're very, very excited, obviously. Picasso dies. So he died right before all this was taking off. So in 1973 is when this campaign was really getting going. And he died, but Nestjar was young, and there was plenty of time, so it seemed. So that's the original model that Nestjar is holding there. Don Saff is actually up top right. So anyway, so they're talking about this and how do we make this happen, where we're going to put it on the campus, and how much money is it going to take to realize it. So the price tag for this towering multiple slabs of concrete would be $500,000. So we think about that today, and it doesn't sound like that much compared to, but who knows? Today it would be, well, a lot more money. And I guess we could check next week and it would be a lot more. So here's Mackey. I've always liked this picture. It's as if like a moon rock just landed in front of them. They're trying to figure out what it is. And they're trying to figure out, do they like it or not? Right, and that's okay, right? So the fundraising starts in 1973, and for those of you who lived through 1973, it was a tumultuous year. The Yom Kippur War happened in the Middle East, so you have the U.S. Kind of reflexively backing Israel. OPEC and the Arab states weren't so happy about that, cut off the oil. This all sounds so familiar to me right now. Cut off the oil, and we had a big energy crisis, right? So the whole economy was really disrupted by the whole thing, and the fundraising campaign flopped big time. And USF, the way they handled it, didn't really help. I mean, the first announcement they made was, I think they had a donor lined up to give $100,000, like when this whole thing started. So they're like, great, we're 20% there. So they made a big announcement and said, we only want donors who are going to give us more, like $100,000 or more. So we just need 4 more. And, now you might be able to find people with that kind of money today, but in 1973 in the Bay Area, not a lot. And are they willing to put that kind of money behind a Picasso that they're not sure they like or not? The answer was no. So as time goes on, USF figures out it's in trouble. They started in September, the actual fundraising. And about halfway through, they made an announcement saying, look, any denomination is fine. $5, $10, you got a quarter. So they opened it up and the public did not react. So, and you can, think about it, we're going back to context at the time, right? So you've got a lot of people in the area that are threatened by a university, teaching beat poetry. How many people are you going to get, to pony up $20 for, a giant Picasso? So, and I think in this case, just the name Picasso sort of dictated how things were going to go. I think it was very polarizing. Imagine that. Just the word Picasso, for a lot of people, that just smacked of like New York elitism, European internationalism. And some people pointed out that, I don't know, for a week or two, he might have gone to a couple Communist Party meetings in the 1930s. And so for a lot of people, that was proof that he was a lifelong communist and that we shouldn't have communists building sculptures here, et cetera, et cetera. So, like I said, the Cold War was a really big deal. And for some people, they just couldn't get beyond it. But there were lots of other reasons for people to hate the Picasso. For people on campus, like the physical plant, they hated the idea. They thought there was going to be all these tourists that would come on campus and visit. There would be too much traffic. There would be people gawking and parking and et cetera. And you can see the physical plant. They were just interested in their job. But the idea of actually having people to come to your campus to hang out isn't such a bad idea. I mean, for 50 years, USF's been trying to figure out how to get students to stay a little longer, right? So, the women's studies, department hated it too. They thought it was a woman's bust, or breasts rather than, the bust of a woman. And, I think women's studies majors probably still have plenty of reasons to not like Picasso. But there is no other, right? So everyone had different reasons. Like I said, the Cold Warriors hated this idea that the Spanish guy, why don't we get an American? And of course, the answer is there aren't any American Picassos. So this was put together by the Oracle. No wonder people called it Picassozilla. I think that the Oracle got the proportions a little wrong here. So I think that looks closer to 200 feet, maybe more. So I think when people, if they saw that photograph, if that was the first thing they saw, it's like, good God. But
when NASA saw that, they almost died.
right. Well, and even if the 100-foot version or 120-foot, you would see from the interstate as you're driving by on 275. I mean, it would be as high, if not higher, than the Busch Gardens, all the rides they have and things like that. But anyway, so I think this gave some people the wrong impression. The Oracle was doing its best, and actually, it was quite an interesting read back then. So this was sort of another, I think, a little more sober rendering of what it might look like. And this is obviously an artist's rendition. Now, for me, the big fantasy land, the Candyland part of it, isn't that we might build a Picasso, near a reflecting pond, but there's this arts complex to the right. That was going to be, I think, $15 million arts complex. And I can't imagine USF building that art complex then or now. The arts are still important at USF, but they're not a centerpiece like they were at the time. So I think that, the Picasso, they were going to kind of leverage that to kind of amplify the arts on campus. And of course, none of that really happened. You know, priorities changed over time. And of course, there were lots and lots of crises and lack of funding and everything else in the meantime that you really had to deal with. So sadly, the arts complex never happened, although arts continued to be really a powerful thing at USF.
Would you consider that an abstract?
What an abstract.
In other words, confusion of what it is. You know, when you see an abstract of all kinds of different areas and angles, you're confused of how to, take that into consideration.
Right.
Would you consider that as an abstract?
You mean this here?
Yeah, huh?
Yeah. I mean, it's an artist depiction.
I don't know what it is.
Yeah, so it's to give you an idea to put it in context of what it would look like on campus. And then also this idea, I think they were trying to sell this complex too. So I think they were trying to sell the whole package. But I do think this is a much nicer rendering than the one we just looked at, that just looked just giant. So this is what they came up with later. But this, it didn't work, the whole package. But I think it's interesting, and people are still really, it's sort of in a white elephant or something, one of these, lost opportunities that people still really think about, and people come and actually study the model. And a few years ago, some people came in and did a bunch of light studies. So, what I find really intriguing about it is, depending on what time of day it is, the light would be hitting it at different angles. It would sort of create planes of positive and negative space, shadow and light. So you can see here, this is like early in the morning. I think it's 9 a.m. on the left, noon, and then, in the afternoon on the right. And then we can see if you're standing from a different angle and the light's kind of, coming from behind it, you're going to see something different. And of course, the way the planes interact, it's pure Picasso, right? Depending on where you're standing, you'll see different types of things. So it's interesting because it's one of these things that people are still interested in. And even though for a lot of people, it's kind of an obscure story, it's one of those kind of wacky stories that gets a lot of attention at USF. And it didn't take long before campus humor started to emerge. This is the idea that if they put the Picasso in upside down, who would be able to tell? Right. And then here, you're an art major, but I'm an art major, but how did you know? So he just walks around, his face looks like a Picasso. So it died a kind of an inglorious death in 1973, but USF still had permission to build this thing. So what now? Well, USF decided it just didn't have the wherewithal to do it. They never kind of started the campaign again, at least not in the 70s. So the city of St. Petersburg, not the city, but enthusiastic people within the city, I guess people who weren't enthusiastic enough to donate to the USF campaign, but wanted to have their own Picasso here in St. Petersburg. So they started with a letter, the letter's on the left, and it basically says we're starting an art council, and we are announcing our intention to build the Picasso here in St. Petersburg. So this was around 1977 that the effort really got underway. So these are a bunch of materials at USF St. Pete. So I work in Special Collections in Tampa. To give you a little idea, that's where the stuff that's just too cool, to live anywhere else, that's where it lives. So it lives with me. So rare things like that model, if someone just walked off with it, there isn't another one of those. Actually, there is one more. President Cecil Mackey, if he's still alive, it's in his condo and under glass, a treasured thing, right? So we deal with, kind of rare materials and things like that. We have a counterpart here at USF St. Pete. It's a little smaller, but they've got a lot of neat stuff as well. And so this is all stuff having to do with St. Pete's stab at the Picasso. So it wouldn't have been far from here. You can see the marina here and the waterfront. And here's another rendering of what it might have looked like. So this is just they were going to do a whole bunch of landscaping and other stuff. So this is sort of what it would look like if they just plopped it down. And they were going to actually build like I think the base of it, the pedestal that it's on is about 10 feet tall, to give you an idea. So it's still a massive statue. I don't know. I'd be interested to know if it's still the 100, I think it is, still the 110, 20 foot. So, yeah, so there's another, and here's the artist's rendering of what it would have looked like. They were going to obviously plant a lot of trees and provide a lot of parking. But, just, I guess, close your eyes for a bit and imagine, what that statue would have looked like on the waterfront. Whether you liked it or not, it would have been a pretty amazing place, a kind of a park. You can see it would have been a kind of a big area, and you can see the people around the statue are looking pretty small, right? So before I go here, actually, so what's interesting is, of course, there wasn't the capital in St. Pete to make it happen. There wasn't really the desire yet. I think that, the Bay Area changed a lot. Florida, changed a lot in the next 50 years. And now there's there's a lot more support for the arts. I think in, city and county governments, as well as just people in general. I think a lot of that has to do with people moving from the north, and then the Floridians who are here kind of becoming more sophisticated over time, right? So it falls on its face in St. Pete and doesn't really go anywhere. So what happens next? And what's interesting, of course, is St. Petersburg never had the permission to build it, but as long as they got Nesjar to do it, he was happy to do it. So that's how they were able to kind of skirt that issue. So if St. Pete was able to skirt that issue, Miami thought, or some developers in Miami thought, why can't we skirt the issue? So they called up Carl Nesjar and he said, yes, I'd still love to do it. This is 1980 now. And their idea was they were going to build some condos. Condos have been in the news in Miami lately. They were going to build some condos, and they wanted to have a park that was adjoining it, and they wanted the Picasso to be sort of a big central feature. Of course, that never happened either. I don't know how serious that effort was, but they certainly made some noise in 1980 about it, and it never really developed. So you would think that would be it. In 1980, it was a kind of a 70s thing, but it was not. USF decided they wanted to revive the effort. This was in 1988, so it's 15 years later. And I think two major things happened. First, we had Vincent Ahern. So he was really into public art. He's a professor and was wildly intrigued, by the Picasso. And we had an incoming president, Frank Burkowski, who was really big on the arts and humanities. And so when he arrived in 1988, he wanted to herald in a new age, right? Like most presidents do. And so he decided that Picasso would be perfect. So they kind of dusted off the plans. They decided they would scale it back so it would be half-sized. So it would be 60 feet tall rather than 120 feet tall. And this is the rendering they came up with. So obviously they're not trying to sell you an arts complex along with it this time. This time it's just a Picasso in the middle of a reflecting pond. So once again, it is interesting to consider what it might have looked like on campus. But now we do have a reflecting pond, and that's MLK Plaza, which has a bust of MLK rather than a bust of a woman. So anyway, so that's how it sort of ended. It sort of sputtered out at the end. But for a while, the whole Tampa Bay area was abuzz with this idea that we might get this giant Picassozilla. And for a while, well, like the slap heard around the world a few weeks ago, everyone had an opinion on it. And I think that's, for that reason alone, it's sort of a success in a sense. Even though it was never built, people could not stop talking about this on and off for 15 years. So I don't know if there's many artists or pieces that could elicit that kind of reaction. Thank you. It's a good question. Nesjar's dead. And okay, and I think in 1988, there is something that I sort of left out. The artistic community sort of turned on USF. So when they revived this thing, they're like, we can still get Nesjar out. And Nesjar's like, yes, I'll do it. And they're like, it's been too long. You can't do this now, And I think Dr. Ahern was very, he was sensitive to this, I mean, he lived and worked in the artistic community. So that was a line that they weren't willing to cross, and they decided to shelve the idea.
And why is the emphasis on this particular piece? I mean, aren't there any other pieces?
Right. It's the only piece that Picasso gave us permission to build before he died. So like if he had given us a choice, we might have chosen something else. That's what Picasso chose. So that's what, sir, back there?
Yes, sir. Thank you for a very interesting and informative background on this history. A couple of questions. The budget was $500,000 to construct it. Do you have any idea what Picasso was paid and by whom?
Yeah, well, he would be dead at the time. So I don't think he was paid anything. And if it was built, I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't know what that would have involved.
Did he make any kind of a statement about the bust of woman artistry that he created, independent of the sculpture?
Did he say something about the sculpture, you mean?
Any kind of a statement of what the sculpture meant, or what the image meant?
Picasso, he wasn't fond of explaining himself much. So no, he didn't explain it. Yeah. Sir.
Did it have to be that scale, or could it have been smaller, or other materials?
Right.
I know an aluminum sculptor, could he do that? That's my question.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know all the particulars. Obviously, it was pretty informal. He just signed this thing, and it said USF and Carl Nesjar. I assume that it would have to be concrete. Carl Nesjar is the one putting it together. He doesn't really, that's his specialty, is the concrete aggregate. So it's hard to imagine. That being a thing.
Maybe I missed this, but what was Nestor's connection with St. How did we wind up with this stuff?
So Don Saff and some of and a couple professors at USF knew Carl Nesjar. They had met him at some point. Yeah, so they sort of pulled on his sleeve, and then he said, "Oh yeah, I can get a Picasso for you." And that's how it happened. I mean, that's how things happen a lot of times, right? So yeah, it was definitely like, yeah, a deal that's impossible to imagine happening the same way today without like agents and managers involved, and right. So I think that's why, like, yeah, I don't know what they would have been paid, or if Picasso would have made a cent from it. I imagine he would have, but I don't know if that was part of the $500,000. That's the question. Yeah.
Where's the maquette today?
Oh, the model?
Yeah, that's the model.
Yeah, it's all right. So the little small one that he saw a picture, we don't know where that is. I don't know if that still exists. The one that USF created is in Special Collections, and you're all welcome to come visit it sometime. But yeah, it is one of our interesting pieces, and bring it out a lot. But yeah, I didn't bring it today, so sorry. But yeah, it's just about yay big. Yeah. Any other questions or comments?
How did you discover this story?
So yeah, I just knew when I arrived in the department, it was like on top of an old card catalog, the model. And I was like, what is that? It kind of looks like a Picasso. And then I just became a junkie, like a USF history nut. I was working on the 50th anniversary book. So in 2006, USF published a book, and I did all the research for that. I didn't write the book, but I did all the research and gave all the research to someone else who wrote it. And for me, all the most interesting stuff was the stuff that wasn't being written about in the book. So all that stuff, I started a column actually for the USF Oracle when I was a graduate student. So for several years, I wrote columns about USF's history, and this is like, I ended up writing a piece about this. So yeah, it was all the kind of stuff that was too interesting or uncomfortable to make it into the official history book. That's all the stuff that I wrote about. I specialize in uncomfortable, I guess. But yeah, so that's how I got at it. And so there's a lot of other quirky stories that I'm, fascinated with in USF, and this is just one of them. But of course, often the failures tell you more than the successes sometimes. And, and then I think there's a lot of good reasons that it just couldn't come together. I think if Picasso was alive or they had better permission, that might have happened later. It might have happened now. Any other questions, or, sir?
Was there any consideration of bringing it to USF St. Pete to exhibit it there while Picasso's here, or here? There's good security in these buildings.
Oh, you mean the model?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would consider it. Certainly, we do, loans like that. Sure. Yeah. Yeah, maybe I'll talk to Kim about it after and see if, if he got a glass case for us. Yeah. Yeah, it's certainly interesting. And I am intrigued by the whole light issue and different times of day and where I'm standing and having lunch or whatever, what it would have looked like. It's intriguing. And then a lot of other people bring up things like, would it get moldy? Would there be, would stuff grow on it? Would there be stains, et cetera, et cetera? And yeah, I don't know if Picasso cared, but yeah. We got two back here. One in the front.
Is there any thought that it can still be made since the man's dead? It's done concrete. It's just sort of a dead contract at this point.
Yeah, I think if it was dead in '88, I don't think there's much hope for it now. Yeah, so I think I don't know if the artistic community would feel any different. But yeah, it's an intriguing idea.
Has the maquette ever been appraised? I would think if Picasso actually created it, it would be worth
Well, he designed it, so he didn't create it. An artist carpenter at USF was the one who created it according to those designs. So it's problematic from that point of view. And so I don't know what an appraiser would do. I'm not sure what an appraiser would do with it. That's an interesting question. You should probably bring someone just to ask him. Yeah, it's worth a try. Did I see a hand in? We're good? Cool. Thank you. Appreciate it.